Hello, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on ransomware case studies and lessons learned. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. The Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from. And it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event that you have any technical issues. A browser refresh will fix most issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. At the end of the event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these expert series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors make it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to those sponsors. And over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today. And they'll refer to links that you can find in your handout section of the console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's fantastic printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. We are supported by Rubrik. Rubrik is a cybersecurity company, and their mission is to secure the world's data. They pioneered zero trust data security to help organizations achieve business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. Rubrik Security Cloud, powered by machine learning, delivers data protection and cyber resilience in a single platform across enterprise, cloud, and SaaS applications. Their platform automates policy management of data and enforcement of data security through the entire data lifecycle. They help organizations uphold data integrity, deliver data availability, continuously monitor data risks and threats, and restore businesses with their data when infrastructure is attacked. You can learn more at the link there on your screen, which is rubrik.com/ransomware. And you can also find the link in your handout section. Today's event is also sponsored by Lacework. Lacework is a data-driven cloud security company, and the Lacework Polygraph data platform delivers end-to-end visibility and automated insight on risks across multi-cloud environments, collecting, analyzing, and correlating data. Customers depend on Lacework to drive revenue, to bring products to market faster and safer, and consolidate security solutions into a single platform. So you can find out more about Lacework in the link on your screen there, or again, in your handout section. So once again, take advantage of that handout section throughout the presentation where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to be joined for this conversation today by Alan Liska. Alan is a CSIRT at Recorded Future, but beyond his title, he's my favorite ransomware expert. He's involved in ransomware response really 7 days a week. He's a first call from a lot of reporters and government officials and industry insiders when there's a new attack type. And he's a regular contributor to our website, ransomware.org, as well as the author of the book, Ransomware: Understand, Prevent, and Recover. Alan, thanks for joining us. Really great to have you here.
I'm excited to be back. I always love these events, and I really love the format that we're doing today. It's kind of one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I love that we're talking about sort of, real world, case studies and some of the war stories that you have, from your sadly, your lots of experience with this stuff over the years. The format that we're going to take here today is walking through sort of lessons learned based on the different stages of the ransomware attack. So, I'll ask you about sort of each stage, and then you can just let loose with the stories that you know about, and expand on some of the lessons that people can take from those. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Well, the first one is, one of the things that we always talk about is how important it is to, prepare and to conduct tabletop exercises. So, I wonder if you can talk about, some situations maybe where you've seen that, or where that's paid off, or where the lack of it hasn't.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people don't appreciate is how important those tabletop exercises are. Um, to having an effective ransomware prevention strategy, because tabletop exercises, when they're done correctly, really help you find the flaws in your organizational security. Lots of assumptions that can be made. I'll give you a great example. I was working with an insurance company in the Northeast, and we did a couple of tabletop exercises. And the first time we went around, and this is why it turned into a couple. But the first time we went around, and the security team basically decided they were going to do the tabletop exercise, invited everybody in, but one of the things they didn't do is they really didn't have a consultative type relationship with the other parts of the organization. They basically lived in their own world, and so they were operating off of their assumptions. And so what would happen repeatedly during the tabletop exercise, and this is everybody's kind of given up half a day, come to this conference room to kind of walk through the scenarios, and the security team is doing a great job of really educating people on what a ransomware attack is. But what they hadn't done is learned what the rest of the organization does. So, for example, we got into one point uh, uh, where we were talking about backups and backup recovery, and the security team made the point, oh, well, we'll go ahead and we'll have the backup team. They had a separate backup team. We'll have the backup team go ahead and get these restored if something happens. And the backup team just kind of looked and said, well, we don't back those up. So there was that
Mm,
disconnect of the assumption was all of these systems are clearly going to be backed up. And the backup team's like, no, we've never been tasked to back them up, so we don't back them up. And so that that led to kind of a broader discussion of, okay, what exactly are we backing up? And knowing that. And so doing that, the next time, 2 months later, we did another test run, another one of these tabletop exercises, and the security team was a lot better prepared. They had talked to each of the organizations. There were still holes in their security, and they still wanted to make sure they pointed that out. Here's where we have some weaknesses, and that's fine. Like, the tabletop exercise is supposed to demonstrate those weaknesses before the ransomware actors can take advantage of them. But they knew what the other teams were doing, and so it was a lot better run. It was a lot smoother, and then collectively these teams could go, okay, yeah, we should prioritize this for budget. We should prioritize this for budget, because that's part of what these tabletop exercises should do, is show, okay, here are where we have holes in our organization's security, and and then collectively, which is something you don't see very often, everybody in that room can go, okay, yeah, that seems like a really big hole. Let's get budget for that. Because let's face it, we all have limited budget, and we all have the different teams that are fighting for their own budget, understandably. But sometimes you have to look at the big picture and go, it doesn't matter if I don't get this thing, because if we're hit with ransomware because this other hole is missed, the whole organization is going to suffer. So it really does help do that. And it highlights things that maybe weren't your leadership weren't aware of. Another example, this was actually in Oklahoma, and it was a manufacturing company that I worked with, and they, the leadership, again, nobody had been bringing them bad news.
mm,
Like, oh yeah, we'll make do with the budget you gave us. We'll make do with the budget you gave us. But nobody was really telling them that, until we sat down to do the tabletop exercise, and this was after Colonial Pipeline. And so even though it's kind of different, well, two very different types of companies, you still had the IT and the OT side to it. And, leadership had been, had not had been assured, but had been led to believe that the OT side was completely separate from the IT side. So there was nothing kind of touching. And so during the tabletop exercise, there was a lot of discussion around bridged systems and what happens if they get access, the bad guys get access to this bridge systems. And we went through, a couple of hours of tabletop exercise before one of the senior managers of the company said, "You all keep talking about bridge systems. What are those?" And the IT guys, were like, "Well, those are the systems that are connected to both the IT and the OT network." And you could kind of see their eyes like, wait, I thought we didn't have any of those systems. Well, no, we have to, because there are systems on the IT network that have to get data from the OT network so we can do the analysis you want. So we have to have those connected systems. And kind of the look on their face, the realization that, oh, a ransomware attack won't just shut down our IT network, it could feasibly shut down our OT network. That kind of brought home that point that, okay, we do need to invest in security from OT because it's not completely separate. So these kind of examples are really important for understanding where understanding kind of where your weaknesses are and being able to put a plan in place to kind of improve those. And in both cases, that I've talked about, the organizations were able to say, okay, here's a plan going forward where we're going to have to fix this. And they were able to get budget approval because you had leadership involved, and leadership very much was like, we don't want this to happen. Let's go ahead and try and find the budget to get these things fixed.
Gotcha. Yeah, those are both great stories, and they raise a lot of questions for me. I mean, one is, isn't part of the point of at least that initial tabletop exercise to uncover those kind of problems? I mean, isn't that part of what you're trying to do with the tabletop exercise, is find out where the misunderstandings are and like find the holes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
you do, but did you ever see the movie My Cousin Vinny?
I have not, unfortunately, no.
Okay. If you get a chance, watch My Cousin Vinny. The great scene at the end, which lawyers that I know love this scene and always kind of quote it. And I'm surprised
Okay.
that this movie from the '90s is so heavily quoted by lawyers, but they all seem to love My Cousin Vinny. But there's a scene at the end where Joe Pesci is questioning his lead witness slash fiance Marissa Tomei, and he knows every answer that she's going to give. Um, Not because he coached her, but because he kind of knew what the answer was, and he was getting to a certain point. And
Yeah.
when you're conducting the tabletop exercises, you absolutely want to uncover anything you might not know. But it's also better, like a good lawyer, if you already know what some of those weaknesses are, and you can use the tabletop exercise to highlight those weaknesses, or to highlight maybe those problems. And again, not in an accusatory way. You're not telling the other department, you suck, and you're bad for our security. What you're doing is in a more collaborative way. And that's one of the reasons why talking to the departments is important, because if you know the weakness is there, you don't want to blindside them in front of your senior management and say, oh, this sucks, and make it look like you're trying to blame them. You want this to be collaboratively. We need to get this fixed, not you need to get this fixed, or we need you to get this fixed. We together need to get this fixed. Doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you do find out things that you really didn't expect to find out in an organization. You might find out that licenses have been expired for 2 years for things that you still have running on your system, and you're like, well, wait. that's kind of a problem. Let's go and address that really immediately. So you're still occasionally going to uncover things that you don't know, but the more prepared you can be, the better it is for everybody, because it makes it look like you are more of a unified organization.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And sort of, to that goal of, being like a lawyer who knows everything, who's not going to be surprised by their own witness on the stand. Are there sort of playbooks or, general resources that people can use to sort of, get their ducks in a row before they hold a tabletop exercise so they get the most out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So CISA has some great resources on its website for running tabletop exercises, and I've got to also plug our book. But the ransomware book has a section on tabletop exercises that kind of, it's a broad overview, but it will at least give you some places to start. And I think even on the ransomware.org website, we've done a couple of articles on tabletop exercises and how they can work.
Yeah.
If you are in the operational technology space, speaking of that, Dragos has a couple of really good blogs on OT specific tabletop exercises. And,
Hmm.
and, and I think that is a really useful area that doesn't get a lot of coverage. So, definitely check out the Dragos website for those.
Okay. And the other thing you mentioned senior leadership. Can it be tricky sometimes to get senior leadership into the room for the exercise? And any recommendations for strategies that work for doing that, or is it like since Colonial Pipeline, they all want to be there? What do you see?
So I'm going to be extremely vague about this,
Okay.
because I don't want to give anything away. But there was a state government agency that I worked with a couple of years back that were having that exact problem.
Hmm.
The appointee who ran the government agency really didn't want to be involved, and so what the team ultimately did, and I don't know how they did it. They didn't kind of give me the sort of inside baseball. I promise I'd share that with everybody. Is they ultimately convinced the leader of the department that it was their idea, and that's really where it has to come from. I think they may have like sent some articles about other department heads that were running tabletop exercises and so on. I'm not really sure how they did it, but they uh, it's important. And yes, now because of Colonial Pipeline, because of ransomware being in the news every day now.
Yeah.
It used to be we'd have a ransomware attack once every couple of weeks that was big news, but now there's like a breaking news ransomware attack almost every day. um, Leaders really want to know about these tabletop exercises. They want to know and they want to be involved, but when they don't, you do have to figure out ways to get them in there. And again, if you can figure out how to make it look like it was their idea, that's going to be even better, because then you're supporting them in their initiative for a tabletop exercise, kind of not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. Sort of psychological jujitsu there,
Right.
to get them to act in their own best interest.
An
So
influence
let's move
operation,
on.
I guess.
Let's move on to sort of the next stage here. Let's talk a little bit about how initial access works and how organizations have managed to catch ransomware at that stage.
Right. So one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is how the division of labor between different parts of ransomware campaigns works. It's very rare that somebody who carries out the actual ransomware, who actually steals and encrypts files, is the one who gets the first access into the network. There's an underground market of what are called initial access brokers. And they're the ones who do that. They get the foothold in the network and they turn around and sell that, kind of like the world's worst house flipping show. Um, and Um, a lot of that activity actually took place on the Genesis marketplace, which, as you probably know, was shut down by authorities a few weeks back. And that disrupted a lot of that initial access activity. We actually immediately after saw a little bit of a slowdown in ransomware attacks because they kind of all had to regroup and find new places to sell their access. So we see a lot more of that activity on Telegram and Tox channels, which are two kind of uh, social media platforms that I highly recommend nobody ever setting foot on, but because they're filled with lots of grossness. But that's where the bad guys like to hang out, and and there is a there are a few ways that that initial access can work. So one of the really common ways that we see right now is credential theft and credential reuse. So a lot, almost every organization I run into has stolen credentials that have been dumped in underground forums. Now, sometimes those are old and outdated credentials. Sometimes they're brand new. And so those are the easiest ways for the initial access brokers to get in because all they have to do is walk through the front door, right? You don't have to hack anything. You don't have to social engineer anything. You just put in the username and password and kind of walk in, which is why multi-factor authentication is so important right now, because there are so many underground credential stolen credentials on underground forums, and it is relatively easy to get them and then get into networks because we all have VPNs now. We all have remote access to our to our companies or organizations, which is why having a good identity and access management program really goes a long way to to helping protect your organization. That means things like alerting if a user tries to connect, a user tries that's connecting from Connecticut suddenly tries to connect from Romania, right? You want that kind of alert. If you have somebody trying to log into the network twice, simultaneously. If you have somebody logging into the network at odd hours, if they're 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and suddenly it's 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, and they're trying to get into the network, those kind of basic level alerts are important. Combine that with multi-factor authentication, and you really have like a behavioral level analysis of authentication. And we've seen where that's worked time and time again. There's probably dozens of examples of um, of organizations that I've worked with where the ransomware attack never even got off the ground because they quickly identified a user who was logging in from a weird location. They were then able to have that have those kind of credentials checked, and say, yeah, that's not right. We're going to stop them, and then we're going to force a password change from the actual, from that actual employee. Again, I can't even count the number that's happened. Same thing with with a lot of the organizations that I work with at Recorded Future who use like underground credential monitoring. So they monitor forums for stolen credentials, and when they see, oh hey, there's 10 credentials from our organization that have been published in these underground forums, let's get those passwords changed. Let's act quickly to do that. A lot of people don't know this, but NIST no longer recommends password changes every 90 days. They don't have a recommendation for how often you should change your password. And it's simply because it's kind of a dumb policy when you think about it, right? Because what everybody does is they just keep the same password and change the last 3 or 4 letters, so or numbers. So it's if my dog's name is Fluffy, then my password is going to be Fluffy Q2 2023, Fluffy Q3 2023, etc. And I'm going to keep changing it like that. And unfortunately, the bad guys are fully aware of those kind of methodologies, and if they see somebody with the password fluffy Q1 2021, they know likely if they try it again now, they're good if they just change that to Q2 2023.
Right.
So that credential monitoring can be really important. We do see still some phishing, a good deal of phishing, and a lot of the phishing exploit kits are rented out by some of the bigger ransomware groups. It's expensive to rent out a phishing kit. I mean, just like if you've ever gone fishing, renting out a fishing boat is relatively expensive for a day versus getting a little sailboat or a canoe out on the water. Um, and so we only see really the big groups taking advantage of that, but you can monitor those campaigns. I think you and I did a webinar earlier this year where I showed you where we had the lead of quackbot infections, and then like a month later, you saw the lead of Black Basta ransomware attacks. So the group behind quackbot would get into the network, put the foothold down, and then turn around and flip that access over to Black Basta, and then Black Basta would hand that out to members of their ransomware groups, and everybody would take a different target and go. So there is very much a connection between that. ICE ID is another one. TrickBot and Emotet, they're sort of old school, but they're still occasionally pop up. So really monitoring for those information stealers that are tied to ransomware becomes really important. So being able to kick them out early is really important. And again, when we talk about success stories, you really see a lot of the activity with the with some of the tools that are being used to stop the bots from landing in your network, and the info stealers from landing in your network. You really start to see a lot of success from there. And if you can stop them early, that's great, because they have, I mean, just like kind of with a car thief, if your door's locked, they're going to try the unlocked door first before they come back to you. And this, if you kill their loader, they're just going to go to one of the other networks where the loader wasn't killed. So that's really important. Third party also is increasingly a problem. Worked with a hospital a while back that one of their vendors got infected, and this vendor happened to be a managed service provider. And so the ransomware actor got into the vendor's network, but didn't deploy ransomware. Instead, they saw that the vendor was connected to a dozen hospitals all over the country, and so they got onto their the vendor's RDP gateway, which is a server that allowed the vendor to connect to multiple clients simultaneously over a remote desktop protocol, and they just walked right into these other networks. Now, fortunately, the hospital that I worked with had a really good identity and access management program, and so the bad guy was able to get to the server that was controlled by the vendor, but then when they tried those same credentials on any other server, it was an immediate flag. The hospital locked the network access for that machine, informed the vendor, and then also informed the FBI, who started an investigation and reached out to all the other hospitals. I don't know. I don't know if they were able to stop all the attacks at all the other hospitals, but it was very, very quick turnaround. Within 48 hours, all the other hospitals have been notified. So those are the kind of quick reactions that you almost have to have in order to stop these ransomware attacks. So really monitoring what's happening with your third-party vendors, especially the ones that have access to your network, combined with the good identity and access management program that we've already talked about, can be really important for isolating when you've done everything correct, but maybe your vendors or your partners haven't done everything correct. And then
Gotcha.
the other way, and we just saw this twice in the first quarter this year, patching anything that is prioritizing patching of anything that is publicly exposed to the internet. Because we had the ESXi ARGs attack, which took advantage of a known vulnerability in ESXi servers, and they were able to, but they were able to find 3,000 unpatched ESXi servers and gain access and deploy the ransomware there. And then with the Go Anywhere vulnerability that the Conti ransomware group used, that was a 0 day. So that was unfortunately unknown. But even so, Go Anywhere released a patch relatively quickly, but Conti still had weeks to deploy their ransomware before people started getting around to patching it. So unfortunately, and I know it's really hard, right? Because if you have something internet facing, it's probably something you want all the time, and you hate installing a patch without lots of regression testing. I totally get that. Know that you're trading the safety of making sure that your server's not going to crash with possibly being hit with ransomware attacks, because the ransomware actors are very, very quick to weaponize new vulnerabilities and new capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing how patching still has not been solved. It's an industry issue. You know, after all these years, it's still just difficult. It's just one of those challenges that's really difficult. So that's the initial access phase, and catching people there, and keeping an eye on your partners as well. Let's move on to the recon phase. So do you have any examples where organizations have maybe caught the attackers while they're sniffing around the network? They've gotten in and they've sort of maybe caught them red-handed, trying to place their ransomware, or start to exfiltrate data, that kind of stuff.
So it's funny. I've been preaching for probably, I don't know how long you and I have been doing these webinars, but at least since I started, that one of the easy ways that you can catch a ransomware actor is if you've invested any money in endpoint protection, so antivirus, EDR, anything like that, if you've spent kind of any money in there, ransomware actors will try to disable those tools because they can't operate while those tools are running. And so one of the things I know you and I have talked about multiple times before is, hey, when something disables your endpoint protection, you should go investigate that. And I've walked into so many organizations where they haven't had that basic check in place, and I'm like, why? It's like free money, right? Because you're getting them at the beginning of the attack, right? And you're before they've had a chance to do a lot of damage, and you don't have to have fancy rules, you don't have to do fancy threat hunting. Something disabled our endpoint protection. Let's go investigate. Nice and simple, right? Finally, in January, I had a company reach out to me and thank me for that, which I sound like a politician telling a politician story. He was a big guy, and he thanked me greatly for lowering his taxes. Yeah, sorry, but yeah, like I actually had a company that's like, you know what, we implemented that, and a ransomware actor got in. We missed the initial access, but as soon as our EDR was disabled, we literally isolated the machine within 30 seconds, and then started the process and kicked them out of the network like an hour later before they could do any damage. And so yeah, so it's a simple solution, but it actually works really well. The other thing that I see, for some of the more advanced organizations, threat hunting has really, really improve their capabilities. So, finding all of the tools that the ransomware actors use during that reconnaissance phase, Mimikatz, Cobalt Strike, Ad Recon, Ad Find, Bloodhound, all of those different tools, we've seen a lot of success there. But where I think my favorite story of this is with a managed services security provider, an MSSP that I've worked with. They started doing some automated threat hunting for some of these tools, and they were able to improve their efficiency at detecting ransomware attacks fairly significantly. Like, I had gone in and done a tour of the SOC, and they were telling me kind of all of the kind of rules they implemented and how they'd gotten their analysts trained up on Sigma and Yara and all these other things. And they were so much more effective at being able to detect and stop these ransomware actors that they had they could have started, like they used to have, and probably still do in some factories, the signs that say X number of days without an accident. That if it weren't for the fact that, like most of us in security, they're paranoid and superstitious, they could have actually started putting a sign up like, X number of months without a ransomware attack and gone past the number one, and been successful. But they would never do that, because they didn't want to they didn't want to get the bad karma from trying to do that. But they were really excited with the success that they were seeing there. And I mean, threat hunting's hard, right? It's a new skill you have to learn on top of all the other skills that you have. But for most organizations, the data to the threat hunt is there. You're already collecting it from your endpoints, from your network devices. It's all, a lot of what you need is in your SIM or it's in your EDR. So it's there. It's just a matter of taking the time to learning and then allocating the time to do that. And it's hard when you're an analyst and you're answering 100 tickets a day, being able to say, being able to say, hey, I'm also now going to take an hour to go threat hunt is really hard, but it can really help an organization if you can get to that point.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I just saw a term that I hadn't seen before, for tools like, Cobalt Strike and things like that, called grayware. Just things that they're legitimate, they have a legitimate purpose, but they're, obviously used by bad actors on a regular basis. So that's a really interesting idea. Just, starting to understand the signatures of those tools and watching for that traffic in your network. So two great tips there. That and just watching out for somebody turning off your AV or your EDR, and glad to see someone was taking your advice. That's good.
Yeah. It is nice, because sometimes I do feel like I'm shouting in the void.
All right, so we've talked about preparation, tabletop exercises. We've talked about initial access, trying to stop them at that point. We've talked about trying to catch them in their recon phase. So let's say let's talk about people who've missed all of that. They're in the worst day of their lives, and they're trying to recover from seeing that their systems are encrypted, and they've got a message from somebody about getting on a private chat to negotiate a ransom. What are some of the things you've seen there?
So the first thing I'll tell you, rely heavily on your cyber insurance. A lot of cyber insurance companies will no longer pay a ransom, but they provide an awful lot of resources for that. So if you have cyber insurance, use the resources that are available to you from your cyber insurance company. In particular, if the cyber insurance company offers you negotiation services, use the negotiator. Because even if you don't intend to pay the ransom, the negotiator can draw a lot of data out of a ransomware actor. They're really, really good at their jobs. And to that end, and I think I've told you this story before, please don't try and negotiate yourself. You are too emotionally tied to it. I worked with a company, and against my advice, the CEO, he's like, I do business all the time. I can handle negotiations. I can handle some little jackass in Russia. Um, and he got in there and he got into the chat and started doing the negotiation and didn't go well. And then he started cussing out the person on the other end of the negotiation. And the negotiator on the other end said, presumably with a straight face, sir, I've been nothing but respectful for you. If you can't be respectful to me, then I'm going to refer this to my manager, and your payment will be doubled. And I get it. Like, that just made the CEO furious, and I get it. Like, you're the criminals. Don't you dare talk to me about norms and respect. But that's why you
Right.
can't do it. And that's why I could never be a negotiator. I mean, my policy. I just want to drone strike all the ransomware actors. So I'm starting from, like, my their negotiation is give me $10 million. Mine is you give me my files back and you come over here and fix my network, or I hit you with a drone. That's not going to work. And that's why I don't do negotiation. The negotiators have a really unique set of skills that you probably don't have, and you should let them do that.
I'm
Great
also going to
example.
assume that you don't have access to lethal drones, but
If I did, the ransomware problem would be over, and I'd be in jail for a really long time. But it might be worth it. Other than we wouldn't be able to do webinars like this. But I hope she doesn't mind me telling this story, but I was talking to one negotiator, and she's really, really good at most of the time, or all the time. But she does her best to remain gender neutral so that they don't necessarily, the ransomware actor doesn't necessarily know that he's talking to a woman on the other end. But there have been a few times where she's let it slip that she's a woman, and sometimes she does that to her advantage. So there was one where the ransomware actor just wouldn't move, wouldn't budge on the price or anything like that, and she said, and she's like, look, I really just need another 24 hours, blah blah blah. And the guy's like, no, I won't do it. And she's like, please, I can't continue talking to you because I've got to get home. I have to make dinner for my husband, and he gets really mad if dinner's not ready on the table for him, and so on. And his attitude completely changed. He's absolutely, I can give you till tomorrow, no problem at all. You go home and you make dinner for your husband, and so on. And go figure, ransomware actors are sexist. Who knew? Uh, just kind of playing that up. The problem was when she went back the next day to talk to him, he just wanted to hit on her, which is often why female negotiators don't reveal their gender because, again, not just sexist, but also creepy.
yeah.
So we definitely see a lot of that. The other thing is, and this goes back to the preparation phase that we talked about earlier. Most of the really good incident response companies are really, really busy. If you decide that you're going to bring in a third-party incident response company, do that while you're doing your tabletop. Decide that while you're doing your tabletop exercises, not after the ransomware attack, because you'll either not be able to get anybody who's good, and I've seen that happen before, where an organization's like, oh, we can handle it. Then it happens, and they realize they're completely overwhelmed and they can't handle it. And so they reach out to, sort of the Mandiants and the CrowdStrikes, and they just get, they don't literally get laughed at, but they're like, yeah, it's going to be 3 months before we can get a team over to you.
Right.
And so you're kind of going down the list until you kind of get to maybe some of the more sketchier, incident response companies who may or may not do a thorough job. So the way you do that is by putting a retainer down with your incident response company ahead of time. Some incident response companies like Mandiant even offer free retainers. The important thing is they want to get the legal paperwork out of the way, right? You don't want to be doing red lines with your lawyer and their lawyer while you're losing $1 million a day because your network's down.
Right.
So having those red lines, having everything done ahead of time can be really important. And then do a really thorough job of cleaning up your systems before you re-put them on the network. So I was working with one organization. I was helping with the incident response, but then they had another group that was doing the disaster recovery, so restoring everything from backup. But one of the things they didn't check is they didn't check how long the ransomware group had been there. And so they restored a machine that had one of the ransomware actor's tools in. It beaconed right out to the ransomware actor. And if we hadn't put in firewall rules to prevent them from getting to back the way they came in, because we immediately saw the ransomware actor was trying to get back in, but that was blocked by the firewall rule. So we had blocked 3389 RDP, which is how they had gotten in the first place. We blocked it for the whole network at the firewall. And so and so really make sure your backups are clean and restore your backups offline. Run your tools, your forensic tools on them to make sure there are no tools left behind by the ransomware actors before reconnecting to them to the network. That becomes really important to make sure that you're not reintroducing the malware back into your network. Certainly not something that anyone wants to do. And then the other thing, and I think again, you and I have talked about this before, but you and I have talked about a lot of things. Is watch out for burnout. So
Yeah.
many of the organizations that I've helped recover, I go back a year later and it's almost a completely new staff,
Mm.
because you're there for 16, 17, 18 hours a day for weeks. You're just exhausted by the end of it, man. A lot of people in information security joke that they want to retire and buy a farm. Now, having grown up with grandparents who had a farm and knowing how Mother Nature can just kick your butt at any time and you have no control over it, I would never ever want to own a farm. But I get it, man. Like, I get why you might, after the kind of burnout you experience here, you might want to go someplace where you don't think you ever need computers and you can just like meld with the land or something. So
Yeah.
I get the urge. It's a dumb urge, but more power to them. But we do see a lot of people leave, not just quit, but leave the industry after a ransomware attack because it is so stressful and you spend so long with that kind of high level adrenaline. You can't do it anymore. You want
Yeah.
anything else but being in information security. So make sure you're taking care of your people. Make sure you're getting them the mental health services they need. Make sure you're sending them home. It sucks, right? Because you want to get things done and you have 10 different departments that are beating down on you saying, I need to get my systems back up and running. It's the end of the quarter. We have to get the taxes done. We have to get sales in, blah, blah, blah. And we can't do any of that. But you gotta check the mental health of your people to make sure they're going to be okay too.
Yeah. Well, and it's I mean, it's most important because you got to watch out for your people and their mental health, but it's also sort of a double tragedy just in the IT industry where there's such a shortage of security professionals to start with, and then anybody who's been through that experience of dealing with a real ransomware attack has just invaluable experience going forward. And to lose them from the industry is a shame for everyone else that they could work for, or the company that they were with to start with. So that's a great
No,
point.
100%.
And you have made that point before, in discussions with me, and it's worth repeating every time. It's a good one. So Alan, I think we've gotten through, like the whole sort of life cycle here. We're talking about sort of general stuff, and you've told all these great stories, but it's been RSA week. Just as far as is there anything sort of in the moment that you would advise people about, or tell them to sort of watch out for that you're seeing out there?
Um, Well, so one of the things that I think is interesting is we continue to see the growth, even though I don't quite understand the business model, we continue to see the growth of the data theft only attacks.
Hmm.
So we're seeing more groups and more active groups that are only stealing data and not encrypting anything. And in some ways, that's harder to detect unless you have a good DLP and data transfer and file management system in place. Ransomware attack, when a ransomware attack happened because all your stuff's encrypted and you're kind of done, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, the the movement toward the data theft only model is a lot scarier to me because it gets missed a lot more often. And you find out about it when you get a call from the Wall Street Journal saying, hey, a bunch of your data has been stolen by Karakurt and is up on their website. And so really keeping an eye, and I haven't done a lot of work with data theft only attacks. Nobody's really called me in to help with those. I think because by the time they find out, it's way too late anyway. There's not a whole lot that I can do. Um,
Yeah.
but a couple things. Um, One, make sure you have a good data management program in place. Make sure, whether it's DLP, whether it's file monitoring, whatever you're doing to monitor for data theft from your network. And then two, have a plan in place. What are you going to do when, your customer's social security numbers appear on an extortion only site? Are you going to pay to take it down? I mean, ideally no, but then you're exposing a lot of risk to your customers and things like that. And similarly, like we saw this with the ransomware attack against the Allen Independent School District in Texas last year. What happens when the ransomware actor emails all of the parents of all of the parents of your school system and say, hey, we're going to publish your kids data because your school refuses to pay the ransom. Like, what are you going to do when the ransomware actor starts reaching out directly to your customers, whether it's data theft only or whether it's data theft and extortion? That's really bad. And then the other thing to start thinking about, and we have a case like this going on now, um, not we recorded future, but the broader we. What happens when you get sued after the ransomware attack? Are you prepared for that? And are you prepared for kind of what that's going through? I mean, there's the hospital in Alabama that's being sued after a ransomware attack because a patient died. Now, it is not directly attributable to the ransomware attack, but the ransomware attack did not help. Because of the ransomware attack, they were, they were forced to pen and paper. They couldn't keep track of where the patients are, and unfortunately, this patient didn't get the attention they needed, and passed away. And they may or may not have if the ransomware attack hadn't happened. We'll never know. Um, but I think it is important that you understand that, likely lawsuits are going to follow a ransomware attack, especially if your client data or your student data or your employee data is exposed as part of that attack. And how are you going to react to that? So that's another big one, that I think is top of mind right now because there are multiple. It's not just the hospital in Alabama, but DC HealthLink is currently testifying in front of Congress and about their ransomware attack and how that happened. And so, not only are they getting sued because of it, they're also having to testify in front of Congress because congressional records, records of Congress people were part of those records exposed during the ransomware attack. So I mean, those are there are big consequences for ransomware that maybe didn't exist a few years back, and that's kind of where we're moving to, unfortunately.
Yeah, you talked about people having their worst day, and that's a whole nother level. Having to testify before Congress about your worst day. Just continuing. Yeah. All
And
right.
the it's amazing how unsympathetic Congress people are for to the security staff and to the people who are out there testifying. And I get it, man. Your data is exposed. You're mad, but Jesus, man, they're the security people are trying. No security person is out there saying, yeah, no, I want to do a crappy job and I don't want to secure the network. They're working with limited resources. They're working with limited capabilities, limiting hiring capabilities. Maybe have a little bit of sympathy for them and don't just get up there and scream and yell at them. But I mean, I think that's like 90% of Congress.
Well, on that note, I think we'll leave it there. Alan, thanks for a great set of stories here. Just really appreciate you sharing your experience. You've got such deep experience with this, and just being able to listen to some of these stories has been fantastic. So it's always a pleasure to have you on, but really appreciate this one.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be on, and I always enjoy these conversations. So looking forward to the next one.
All right. I'll see you next time. All right. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. That is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. So the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Frank Fork from Alaska. Congratulations to Frank Fork. We'll be in touch to get you your card. Hopefully that'll give you a boost for the weekend there, Frank. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. That's Rubrik and Lacework. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.